Hi everybody. In this video I'm going to show you how to change the level of opacity so you can potentially see through elements in your web pages, and then also how to add gradients so that you can have colors shift across the image, and also a couple different ways to do that, and then also how to sort of stack different layers with different levels of opacity in in CSS. So let's go ahead and get started with the starter file. With the starter file, it should be just the basic sort of Dream Cafe starter that you started with, in the last assignment. And one of the first things I'm going to show you how to do is just set up that transparent header, and then set it so that the image goes all the way to the top, and the transparent header just sits over the kind of just lays over the top of the image, so the image is full screen. So right now in my CSS, the header is just using normal flow. Right? It's not, I think, or the H1 is. Do I even have a setting for the header overall? No. But my H1 and my nav look like they're both just using normal flow. So whatever loads first, it goes from top to bottom. If you look at the HTML file, whatever loads first is on top. So got the H1, and then the nav loads after that. They just kind of go in that order, and then the image comes after that, and so it's below the H1 and the nav. What I'd like to do is kind of pull the like nav and the H1 out of normal flow and just kind of stick them on the top. So what I'll do, I think I'm actually just going to group them together, inside of a header. I'm going to consider them all part of the header at this point. They're all just going to be stuck at the top, so that these nav links are going to be stuck with the name of the page, the title of the page, the H1. And then with CSS, what I can do, I'll create some header styles. Say header. Mainly concerned with just the positioning and the opacity. So I'm going to say position absolute. I'll set it 0 pixels from the top and 0 pixels from the left. And its opacity I'll set to try half. So it's just an opacity is just a number from 0 to 1. 0 is entirely transparent. 1 is entirely opaque, like you can't see through it at all. It's just solid. So the default is 1. And if you take away any opacity, go any closer to 0, you can see through it more. So I'll try half opacity. You'll see it looks all right. One problem is that you kind of lose some of the readability in the text, right? I think it looks pretty cool like that, but it's also not exactly easy to read. Another issue you're going to notice is you couldn't tell when it was a small screen, but full screen, this is kind of stuck in the corner. So a few more changes to make. I think I'm going to increase the opacity just a little bit more. It'll make it a little bit easier to read the text. And I'm also going to say width 100%. I just refresh my full screen, and now it takes up the entire top of the screen, and I think it's a little easier to read that text now. now that I've increased the opacity just a little bit. You can still see through it. You can still see the image behind it, but it's easier to read. Anyway, so that takes care of the basic transparent header. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to next show you how to also add a gradient to an image, and just do that through Photoshop, or I'll use Photopea. But also I'm going to show you how to do, you can actually do a similar thing, but you have a little bit less fine control over it directly in CSS. So first thing first, I'm going to sort of use these additional links to the other parts of the page. I'm not actually going to add like menu content and location content and all that. I'm just going to use them as just sort of places to stash alternate copies of this. I mean, you could imagine if this was a real website for this restaurant, the menu page and the location page could actually have the same background. Just they would have different content. You could sort of add another semi-transparent layer over the top here, or you could have fully opaque layers over the top. There's all kinds of different ways you could arrange it, but for now I'm just kind of really all I'm trying to do is demonstrate demonstrate the exact same thing 3 different ways. So I'm really just going to use those other pages as places to put stuff. So what I'll do is I'll say menu dot HTML for menu, location dot HTML for location, so that you can actually use those links. And I'll create those files. And I'll actually set up index.html as well, just so that works. And now that I've got links in all of my navs, I can just copy all of index.html over to location and menu, and then I can just make some modifications to these just to demonstrate a few different ways you can do similar things but with some slight variations. So the next thing I'll show you how to do is first just use Photoshop to modify the image, or in this case Photopea, but the process is pretty much the same. In order to do this, I'm gonna want to choose some colors, and I should be pretty conscious about my color selection. So in the past I had been sampling this gold color from the cafe window. I think I'll try using that as a starter and see what kind of color palettes I can generate. So I'm going to copy this hex value. I'll go to a color palette generator. I've been using Color Space. Other ones are good too. There's one called Coolers. That one's pretty good. And there's I think Canva is. I think Canva might be free, but I'm not sure. So I'm just going to paste that. I'm going to generate. I'll see what options I like. Maybe this like blue and this green might look good. I'll try that. Anything else? Sure. Let me try this blue and this green. See how that works out. So I'll copy the hex value from here. I go over to Photopea. I'm going to be drawing a gradient here. So in Photopea, what I'm going to do is draw a gradient line using the gradient tool, and then Photopea will generate a gradient, and I'll blend it with the it'll blend it with the image. So I need to choose the color that's going to start with, and then the color that it's going to transition to in the gradient. So I chose that blue. And then for my bottom color, you have to choose a top color and a bottom color here, a foreground color and a background color. And for the background color, I'm going to choose that other option from the color palette I generated. All right, so I've got those two colors. Now I'm going to add a new layer because I don't actually want to cover up this this photo. I just want it to have a layer with a gradient over the top of it and then blend the two. So I have to add a new layer. Click this image that looks like a new page sort of thing. That'll add a new layer. Grab my gradient tool, which if you're showing the paint bucket, it's in the same location. So just right click and choose gradient. And then however you want the gradient to go, it's going to go from, in this case, it's going to start with your top color and fade to your bottom color here. So, for example, if I want it to go from bottom left to top right, I would just draw my line from bottom left to top right. You see it drew the gradient. I think I should try that one more time. It's like a little bit too much blue. That's better. So you'll notice it's covering up the image behind it. So instead of having just a normal blend mode, what I'm going to do is click this thing that says normal right here in my layers tab. And instead of the normal blend mode, I'm just going to blend the color. You can see now it's applying that gradient, but it's just sort of, it's only blending the color. It's like really, really bright blue. That's interesting. If I want to take some of the edge off of it, I can turn the opacity down. It looks pretty good. So you can see it's like fading from blue to yellow, or dark yellowish green. And I think this is what I'll use. So I'll export this. And then I'm going to import it back into, I'll import that into REPL. And just select that image. And add that to my image source instead. So now let me just use this. When I run this, this is my original. This is my gradient. So it's just a different look. It just adds an interesting effect. So one other way you can do this is instead of doing this in Photoshop, you can actually do a similar thing. You won't have quite as much fine control over it because using a photo editor is meant for editing photos. CSS isn't exactly meant for you to be real-time processing just all kinds of images. I mean, you can do a lot of powerful things with CSS, but it's just a lot. It's just much clunkier than editing things. But sometimes you want to do it that way because sometimes you want to have visual effects that you can easily change through your program. So if you set the effects programmatically, you can change them programmatically. So I'll show you how to do it through the program. Also, sometimes you just want to put a gradient on things just as your background. So I'll show you how to put a gradient on things. So this time I'll use the location.html. I'll start with the standard cafe image instead of the cafe image with the gradient already applied. And what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to include a div with the ID gradient, and I'm just going to close the div. And it's actually not going to have any content. It's just going to be a box. And I'm going to fill that box with a gradient. And I'm going to use some CSS to make some adjustments to it. So in my CSS, I'll select the gradient. Selecting the gradient by ID. And so the simplest version of this would just be to say linear dash gradient. I believe linear that's actually not, no, it's not. You can't just say linear gradient. It's actually a background image. So you have to say background dash image, and your background image is just going to be a generated gradient. So then you say linear gradient. And this, I mean, the simplest version of this is just sort of the default is you put the colors in, but you can also you can also specify how it aligns, kind of like you did by drawing a line, like I just did in Photopea. So I did that from the bottom left to the top right, so I can actually do the same thing by saying to top right. So it'll be a line going from the top, going sort of from the bottom left to the top right, and then separate my colors with commas. I just need to grab those hex values again. I believe I went from blue to green, so grab that hex value. Grab this hex value. And then you'll notice that absolutely nothing shows up. I go to my location, and there's nothing there. That's because there's nothing in the div. So the div is actually not taking up any space, and you can't see it. So we're going to have to force the div to be visible. So that one way we can do that is just by saying width is 100%. Height 100%. And we want it to fill the whole screen just like the image does behind it. So we have to say position absolute. Basically just match the positioning of the photo. So we'll say top 0, left 0. And then the tricky part is actually the layering. So if I run this, will it even be visible yet? It really depends. It is. It's actually covering everything. So this is the problem. It's using right now normal flow. It loads the last thing. Sort of last in is on top. Well, it's kind of covering everything. So one way you can have more control over the layering of things, we've done this once before, maybe twice before, is the z index. So z index is just the stacking of things. A larger number is stacked closer to the front. So if I want to pull something closer to the front, I get a higher z index. So what I'm going to do, I'll give this a z index of 1. And then I'm going to go find, let's see, I'm going to give basically everything else. So I'll go to my sort of star that just refers to everything. Star means all. And I'm going to say z index 2. So most things should be in front of this. The one exception is that image. I actually want the image to be behind it because I want the gradient to affect the, I want the gradient to actually lay over the image and affect the image. So I'm going to say z index 0. So the image will be the only thing behind the gradient. Everything else will be in front of the gradient. So now, it's great. So far so good. It's just still covering the image because we didn't change the opacity yet. So go to the gradient, CSS again, and say opacity. Let's try half opacity. See how that looks. Not too bad. It's a little dark. Let me just see how it looks full screen. So, got home, menu, location. So you can see I kind of prefer the Photoshop version. The colors are a little more vivid and the darks are darker, lights are lighter. And this one seems kind of washed out, but I mean, you could probably experiment with it and get it to look how you like. But it'd be significantly more complex trying to deal with that in CSS. So one other thing I think I should do, because this, everything is kind of everything is looking very uniformly kind of, it's like gray and soft colors, and nothing really pops out that much. One thing that should really be popping out in this web page would be the order online option. Right? Is something I want to try to reinforce periodically, is that one of the goals of designing a website is to sort of get the user to do what the owner of the website wants them to do. Like, you're trying to sort of either sell something or get people to look at certain information or be entertained by something, but you have to direct the user to where that product, service, entertainment, where that is. So I'm gonna set up this. I'm just gonna add some color to this this order online button. See, like, it would be another good color that might blend. I want something like really bold. I'm thinking like one of these like shades of pink or purple to really pop against all of that. I'm gonna go with this one. See how that turns out. So what I really need to do is, let's see, I don't think I have any way of selecting, I don't think I really have an easy way of selecting the order online. Yeah, the order online yet. So what I'll do is I'll just give that anchor tag an ID. I'm going to say order. And I should probably copy that across everything else. So I'll add that to my location page. I'll add that to my menu page. And then I'll go to my CSS. Select order by ID. And I'll set the background color. Oops, I lost my hex value. Go back, copy that. And let's see how that looks. Well, the color's bold, but I can't read anything because it's white text on very pale pink. So let's change the text color to the off black that we've been using. Much better. Now that order button really pops out. Right, you can see in all versions of this, you can it really draws attention to this and says, click here to order. So that brings you pretty much everything, except you may notice if you were scrolling around at all, got a little bit of an overflow issue. It's a simple solution. Basically, just the image is just continuing to display the whole thing, and we don't really need the whole thing. So let's just set overflow for this page to be hidden. So the whole thing, everything just gets overflow hidden. Really, it's the only thing that's overflowing. All right, so now there's no more overflow issue, and everything fits on the page. So there's just a few examples of how to incorporate different levels of opacity into your web pages, how to stack different layers using the z-index, how to incorporate gradients in a couple different ways.